At 2:17 a.m. on my solo trip, I watched a human-like shadow detach itself from a tree line, moving with impossible speed towards my camp. My hand instinctively went to the lever action beside me, but the sheer wrongness of its gait froze me to the spot. The wilderness holds secrets far older and darker than any campfire story, and these are the chilling accounts of hunters who stumbled upon them. Story 1: The Last Hunt of Mark Stevens. This happened to me in the fall of 2019, when I was working nights at a rundown truck stop gas station, just off Interstate 81, a few miles north of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. My shift ran from 10 at night until 6 in the morning, which sounds grim, but it actually suited me just fine. The quiet hours, the hum of the fridge, the occasional lonely trucker, it gave me a lot of time to think. What I really looked forward to, though, was my time off. I've always been a solitary person, and the endless stretch of concrete outside the gas station just fueled my craving for something wilder. So, most of my vacation days, and even some long weekends, were spent deep in the Blackwood National Forest. Blackwood wasn't the biggest national forest, but it was dense, untamed, and perfect for getting truly lost in nature. I'd pack light, leave my old Ford F-150 at the trailhead, and hike for days, usually heading for one of the less traveled backcountry campsites. The solitude out there was like a balm for my soul. I'm an experienced hunter, a quiet observer of the woods. I know the sounds, the smells, the subtle shifts in the wind. Being out there, just me and the wilderness, was my sanctuary. It was where I felt most alive, most connected. That autumn, things started, subtly. My first couple of trips into Blackwood that season felt a little off, but I couldn't put my finger on why. The air just seemed heavier, the silence a little too profound. I saw fewer deer, fewer squirrels chasing each other up oak trees. I chalked it up to changing weather patterns or maybe a natural dip in local wildlife populations. Forests breathe, after all, and sometimes they hold their breath for a while. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks in the quiet. Then came the third trip, deeper into the forest than I usually ventured, following a faint game trail no one had used in years. It was late afternoon, the sun already dipping below the canopy, when I first heard it. A low, guttural sound, incredibly deep, almost vibrating through the forest floor. It wasn't a bear's growl, not a wolf's howl. It was too resonant, too sustained. It stopped as quickly as it started, leaving an unnerving echo in the quiet. My spine tingled, but I blamed it on the chill of the evening and my imagination. Probably just a distant logging truck, I told myself, deep in the mountains. I set up camp, built a small fire, and kept my rifle close. I didn't feel afraid, exactly, just alert. The kind of alertness a hunter feels when they know there's something else in the woods, something big, even if they can't see it. The next morning, the forest still felt unnervingly quiet. I decided to pack up and head out, cutting my trip short. As I hiked back towards the trailhead, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, but every time I turned, there was nothing but trees. A few weeks later, I was back. Foolish, I know, but the call of the wild is a powerful thing, and I felt like I needed to conquer that uneasy feeling. This time, I went even deeper, trying to find a remote valley I'd heard whispers about, supposedly untouched. The guttural calls returned on the second night, clearer now. They weren't distant. They were close. And there was no mistaking it, these were not animal sounds. They were rhythmic, almost like a strange, drawn-out chant, but ragged, as if coming from something with a broken throat. They pulsed from different directions, a slow, deliberate circle. My heart hammered against my ribs. I sat bolt upright, staring into the impenetrable darkness beyond my small campfire. The calls stopped abruptly, replaced by an even more terrifying silence. This was no ordinary forest quiet, it was a silence that felt held, a breath being collectively baited. I heard a faint, almost imperceptible rustling, not of leaves in the wind, but like something dragging itself through the undergrowth. My blood ran cold. I gripped my rifle, my knuckles white, sweat beading on my forehead despite the chilly night air. I told myself to be rational, that it was probably a bear. But my gut screamed otherwise. A bear would make noise, would sniff around. This was different. This was stealthy, deliberate. I saw it then. At the very edge of my campfire's flickering light, where the warm glow met the deep, crushing darkness, a shadow moved. It wasn't the shadow of a tree, or an animal. It was too tall, too slender, too fluid. It was a distortion in the air, a negative space that shouldn't have been there. My breath hitched. I squeezed my eyes shut for a fraction of a second, then snapped them open. It was still there. And it wasn't alone. More shadows emerged, shifting, merging with the absolute blackness of the trees. They were impossibly tall, unnaturally thin, their limbs moving with a strange, jerky grace that made my stomach churn. They were watching me. With an unnerving stillness, they just stood there, at the threshold of light and dark. I couldn't make out features, but I felt the weight of their gaze, cold and utterly devoid of anything human. It was like being observed by predatory shadows, entities that shouldn't exist, moving on the very edge of perception. A wave of primal terror washed over me, a feeling I'd never experienced in all my years in the woods. This wasn't a bear, this was something fundamentally wrong. My body reacted before my mind could process it. A cold dread seeped into my bones, a taste of damp earth and something sickly sweet filling the air. I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had to get out. Not in the morning, not at dawn. Now. I slowly, carefully, reached for my backpack, pulling out my small axe and a flashlight. The figures didn't move. They simply watched. My hands trembled as I doused the fire with the remaining water, plunging the clearing into near total darkness. The figures seemed to ripple, to become even more indistinct. I flicked on my powerful headlamp, its beam cutting a swath through the night, illuminating only trees and empty spaces where the figures had been just moments before. I scrambled to gather my essentials, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, made me jump. I swung my headlamp wildly, trying to pierce the oppressive darkness that now surrounded me. Then I heard it again. A faint, almost silent shuffling, closer this time. It was all around me. I wasn't just being watched. I was surrounded. The guttural calls began again, a soft, sickening chorus, closer than ever. They were no longer at the edge of the light, they were in the darkness, just beyond the reach of my lamp. Panic surged. I dropped my pack. My rifle felt impossibly heavy. There was no time to pack. No time for anything but escape. I took off, crashing through the undergrowth, adrenaline roaring in my ears. I didn't care about the trail, I just ran, trying to put as much distance as possible between me and them. Branches whipped my face. Roots tripped my feet. I fell, picked myself up, and kept running. I could hear them behind me now, a soft, relentless padding, too light for any animal, too many for a single hunter. They weren't rushing. They were stalking. Playfully, almost. My lungs burned. My legs screamed. I didn't dare look back. I just focused on the faint hope of my truck, miles away, at the trailhead. I ran until I couldn't breathe, until the world spun around me. I stumbled out of the tree line and onto the gravel road that led to the trailhead, collapsing onto my hands and knees, gasping for air. The truck was there, a beacon of safety in the pre-dawn gloom. I scrambled into the cab, fumbling for the keys, my hands shaking so violently I could barely insert them into the ignition. The engine roared to life. I slammed the truck into reverse, spinning gravel as I backed away, then tore down the dirt road, not stopping until I was miles away, out on the familiar asphalt of Route 322, heading for the highway. I never went back to that part of Blackwood. I couldn't. The memory of those silent, emaciated figures, their unnerving stillness, the predatory intent I felt emanating from them, it's burned into my mind. I sold my hunting gear, even traded in the old Ford for a newer sedan. The woods no longer felt like a sanctuary. A few months later, still shaken and barely sleeping, I saw a small article in the local paper. It talked about a missing hunter, a man named Mark Stevens. His abandoned truck was found weeks earlier, deep in the Blackwood National Forest, miles from any known trailhead. Mark Stevens was never seen again. My blood ran cold again, just like that night. He must have gone to the same area. He must have encountered them. He didn't make it out. I barely did. What I saw wasn't just a figment of my imagination, and Mark's disappearance confirmed it. Sometimes, late at night, when the gas station is quiet, and the fluorescent lights hum, I think about what's still out there. What stalks those silent parts of the forest, waiting for the unwary. And if you ever feel that strange pull to venture deep into the untouched wilderness, seeking perfect solitude, remember that some places demand a price for their peace. Sometimes, the silence isn't empty. Sometimes, it's just holding its breath. Story 2, The Clearing's Ancient Secret. This happened to me in the fall of 2019, when I was working nights at Maple Leaf Manufacturing, a plant just outside Oakwood Springs. My shift ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., a lonely stretch of hours that made daylight adventures with my best friend, Kevin, all the more precious. Kevin and I had been friends since we were kids, bonding over everything from late-night video games to, most importantly, our shared passion for hunting and exploring the dense woods that bordered our small town. We knew those forests like the back of our hands, or so we thought. We'd spent countless weekends tramping through trails, sometimes even venturing a little off the beaten path, but always within a comfort zone. That autumn, we decided we wanted a new challenge. We'd seen an old, almost faded section on an outdated survey map, a patch of forest marked uncharted that stretched further north than our usual hunting grounds. It was an irresistible call to adventure, a chance to truly test our outdoor skills. We planned our trip for a cool Saturday morning, fully stocked with gear, provisions, and an almost childlike excitement. Kevin, always the more organized one, had double-checked everything, even packing an old, reliable compass alongside our modern GPS, just in case. We set out early, eager to be the first to truly explore this forgotten corner of the wilderness. The initial hours were perfect. Crisp air, the smell of pine and damp earth, the rustle of dry leaves underfoot. We moved deeper, past the familiar game trails and into a quiet that felt different. The trees here were older, their bark thicker, gnarlier, and a strange, velvety moss clung to everything, even the rocks. Then the small anomalies began. First, the compass. It started to twitch, subtly at first, then more erratically, spinning a full circle before settling on a random direction, only to repeat the dance moments later. Kevin frowned, tapping it, but it kept misbehaving. Next, the GPS signal sputtered and died, leaving us with nothing but a blank screen. We laughed it off, attributing it to the dense canopy, but a knot of unease began to tighten in my stomach. We were truly off the grid now, relying solely on our instincts and Kevin's increasingly unreliable compass. The forest grew quieter, an unnatural silence replacing the usual chirping of birds and the rustling of small animals. It was as if every living creature had fled. The air, despite the autumn sunshine trying to break through, grew noticeably colder, a bone-chilling dampness that seeped into our clothes. We kept pushing forward, our curiosity overriding the growing sense of wrongness. The trees started to feel different. Their branches seemed to twist in grotesque, almost deliberate ways, like gnarled fingers reaching out. I swore I saw fleeting shadows in my peripheral vision, shapes that didn't quite match the movement of branches. A faint, earthy smell began to permeate the air, mixed with something metallic, something vaguely sweet and sickly. It was unsettling, like decay and iron. My body reacted before my mind did, a primal shiver running down my spine, my skin prickling with goosebumps even in my heavy jacket. "Josh, do you feel that?" Kevin whispered, his voice hushed, eyes scanning the dense undergrowth. "It's like, the air is heavy. Like someone's watching us." His usual easy grin was gone, replaced by a tense frown. We were both feeling it, that oppressive dread. We knew we should turn back. Every instinct screamed at us to retrace our steps, to leave this unsettling quiet behind. But something, a dark curiosity, or perhaps just stubbornness, compelled us forward. We were so close to what felt like the edge of the unknown. Then, through a particularly dense thicket of thorns and ancient, twisted pines, we saw it. A clearing. Not a natural one, but a perfect, unervingly circular space in the heart of the seemingly impenetrable forest. The ground was strangely bare, not a single leaf or twig littering its surface. In the center, an archway. It wasn't built, but grown. Two massive, ancient trees, impossibly old, had bent and twisted, their thick trunks and branches forming a grotesque, natural arch that loomed over a crude, dark stone altar. The air here was utterly still, devoid of any breeze. The altar itself was massive, hewn from a dark, rough stone, its surface stained. The metallic, sickly sweet smell was overpowering here, an acrid tang that made my stomach churn. I didn't want to believe what my eyes were telling me, but the dark, dried patches on the stone were unmistakable. Blood. Ancient, dried blood. And then, the realization hit us both, a wave of pure, unadulterated terror. We were not alone. The silence wasn't empty, it was pregnant with presence. We were being watched. Every hair on my body stood on end. "We need to go," Kevin choked out, his voice barely a whisper, his face pale, eyes wide with a fear I'd never seen in him. We didn't exchange another word. We turned, scrambling, desperate to put distance between us and that impossible, silent clearing. As soon as we plunged back into the woods, the silence behind us shattered. A sound began, deep and resonant. Thump. 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 Rhythmic. Heavy. It was coming from the clearing, growing louder with every beat. Panic took over. We ran, blindly crashing through the undergrowth, branches tearing at our clothes, our hearts hammering against our ribs. The thumping grew closer, a relentless, terrifying rhythm that vibrated through the very ground beneath our feet. It was pursuing us. Faster. Louder. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was something else, something ancient and massive. We could feel its presence closing in. The air grew colder still, freezing my lungs with every ragged breath. Kevin was ahead of me, just barely. We burst out of a thicket, and he caught his foot on a root, stumbling hard, falling to the ground with a grunt. I instinctively reached for him, but my own momentum carried me forward a step. I glanced back. Just a flicker. A massive, indistinct shape was emerging from the grotesque archway in the clearing, silhouetted against the unnatural stillness. It was huge. Formless. Kevin let out a single, piercing scream. Then, abruptly, silence. His scream was cut off as if by an invisible blade. The thumping stopped. I didn't see what happened. I couldn't. My mind refused to process it. All I knew was that Kevin was gone. And I was alone. A primal fear unlike anything I'd ever known seized me. I didn't look back again. I ran. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs gave out, until I crashed through the familiar tree line and onto the gravel road leading back to town. Covered in scratches, trembling, gasping for air. I stumbled home, incoherent, and eventually managed to explain, or at least attempt to explain, to the authorities that Kevin was missing. They mounted a search. They found nothing. No sign of Kevin, no sign of any clearing, no sign of anything unusual in the designated search area. They suggested he might have gotten lost, or wandered away, or worse. They looked at me with pity, or suspicion. I knew what I saw. I knew what I felt. And I knew I was forever changed. I left Oakwood Springs a few months later. I couldn't stay. The woods, which once felt like home, now held an unspeakable dread. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls and the house is quiet, I swear I can still hear a faint thumping from deep in the trees. And I wonder what ancient secrets are still waiting, just beyond the edge of the map, for the next curious soul to stumble upon them. Maybe it's still out there, waiting.